This is male revenge. Here you'll meet men the world had counted out, betrayed, robbed, written off as finished. But Scripture says, "Vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord." So these men do not answer evil with evil. They wait. They keep the faith. They let the truth come to light in its own time, and trust the Lord to settle what no man's hand can. Patience is not weakness. It is faith with its boots on. Tonight, one such man sets a table. Lean in and listen. I need you to understand one thing before I tell you the rest. Everything that follows depends on it. The dinner I am about to describe was not a celebration. It had the shape of one. There were candles down the length of the table, good wine in the glasses, and a gumbo I had been building from a dark roux since 3:30 that morning. But the table I set that Thanksgiving was not a table. It was a trap. And the woman smiling at me from the far end of it had already walked into the middle of it without knowing. She was my son's wife. For the better part of 3 years, she had been taking my family apart, quietly, one small piece at a time, and she was certain I was too old and too tired and too far gone to notice. For a while, and it shames me to admit it, she very nearly convinced me she was right. In the center of the table, between the candles and the bread, I had set an old cypress box. My grandfather built the original bar from that same wood. Inside the box was everything I had gathered across 10 months of silence. 10 months of saying good morning to people who were lying to me and smiling and meaning none of it. Some of what I found had to do with money. Some of it had to do with this restaurant my family fought to keep through everything, and some of it, the part I was least prepared for. The part that pulled a thread all the way back to the night I lost my wife, I still do not have a clean way to say out loud. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you to the morning, because that is where it always starts. I got up at 3:30. I have not needed an alarm clock since 1968. The roux takes time. That was the first thing Diane ever taught me about gumbo, and it is still the only instruction worth keeping. You cannot rush it, and you cannot walk away from it. You stand at the stove and you stir and you wait, and the color shifts from blonde to bronze to the deep brown of an old penny. And then the smell changes, and then you know. That morning I stood there a long time in the dark, stirring slow, with Diane's apron tied around my waist, blue cotton, faded soft along the edges. Her name stitched across the chest in green thread she picked out herself from a little shop on Decatur Street the summer we opened these doors. She taught me to cook in this kitchen, and some mornings I can still feel her hand closing over mine to slow me down. I take that apron down from the wall every Thanksgiving morning before I do anything else. Some things are not habits. They are decisions you make so many times that, in the end, the making of them and the man you are become the same thing. Before I left the kitchen, I checked the gas valve behind the stove, a quarter turn to the right, then back to center. Diane made me promise to do that every morning of our marriage, and she never once told me why. Years after I buried her, I was still keeping the promise. Some mornings I think it is the only reason I am alive to tell you any of this. The guests came at 11. Miss Loretta first, the way she always is, early enough to fix whatever she has decided I set out wrong. Hector and his wife behind her Hector, 30 years a kitchen inspector for the parish, a man who had known my father and eaten at this table since before my son was born. Carlos worked the kitchen beside me, easy and sure, the way a man moves through a place he has known for 20 years. Diane embroidered his name on his first apron herself, Small, careful letters. The Christmas after he started. She always said that one had a good heart. I believed her. I had no reason yet not to. Patrick and Sloane came 40 minutes after everyone else. They came through the front door in the middle of a conversation, and by the time I walked out to meet them, the conversation had stopped. My son hugged me the way he has hugged me for a few years now, quick, at an angle, like he had forgotten how long a man is supposed to hold on to his own father. There was a time he hugged me like he meant it. I could still find that younger man somewhere in his face, if I looked hard enough. Lately, I had to look very hard. Sloane offered me her cheek. She smelled of rain and expensive perfume, and she smiled at me the way you smile at someone you have already finished with. We sat. The gumbo went around. Someone poured the wine. Outside, the afternoon had gone gray, and a thin rain had begun to tick against the windows. The cypress box sat in the center of the table where I had left it that morning. No one asked about it. I offered nothing. I watched my daughter-in-law's eyes find it. She picked up her wine, turned the glass slowly in her fingers, and set it back down. She looked around the table at the guests, at the candles, at the box, and then at me. For one moment, something flickered across her face. Not fear. Sloane did not do fear. Call it curiosity, the look a cat gives a thing not yet ready to move. Then she tapped the rim of her glass once with one finger. The room went quiet. "I'd like to say a few words," she said, "and here is the truth I had told no living soul." I had been waiting a long time for someone to stand up and say exactly those words. I had spent 10 months, and the better part of everything I had saved, making certain that she would. So I folded my hands, and I let her begin. She was on her feet before my son could stop her. Sloane had the look she got when she had decided to burn something down. Chin up. Eyes bright, the kind of bright with nothing warm behind it. She held her glass out as though to toast me, though everyone there understood it was not meant to honor anyone. "Before Walter makes his little speech," she said, her voice carrying easily across the room, "I'd like to say a few words of my own." Patrick reached for her arm. "Sloane, maybe we should—" "I'm fine." She pulled away without looking at him. "Perfectly fine." She turned to me and gathered herself, the way a person does when they have rehearsed something a long time and finally decided tonight is the night. "I want you all to know I say this with love," she began, and she let her voice go soft, the way she did when she wanted a cruelty to sound like kindness. "Because somebody at this table has to be honest about Walter, and none of you ever will be." She turned to face me. "You have spent 75 years holding on to a building and calling it a legacy. You turned a restaurant into a museum and called it loyalty. And in all that time, you never once asked your own son what he wanted. Because what Walter wants is the only thing that has ever mattered under this roof." She let it land. Around the table, people I had known 30 years found somewhere to look that was not my face. Diane used to say he was the most stubborn man she had ever loved. Sloane went on. "Personally, I think she was being generous. I think she got out while the getting was good." She smiled. "And honestly, I don't blame her one bit." The room went completely silent. Here is what was true, and she knew it too. Diane did not get out. Diane died with her boots on, in a flooded kitchen, holding a book she believed was worth more than her own life. The men at that table had rebuilt this restaurant out of the mud after she was gone. Miss Loretta had held my hand at the graveside. Everyone in that room knew exactly how my wife died, and Sloane knew that they knew. She said it anyway. I had come to understand the woman my son married. She grew up with nothing and decided early that sentiment was a luxury for people who could afford to lose. To Sloane, this restaurant was never a home. It was a number waiting to be collected. I almost understood her. Almost. Patrick did not speak. He did not lift his eyes from his plate. He sat with his shoulders pulled inward, the way a man sits when 16 years of marriage have taught him that the safest thing he can do is make himself smaller and wait for the storm to pass. Sloane sat back down and reached for the wine. I let the silence do its work. And then, slowly, I smiled. Diane used to call it my dangerous smile. She said it was the one expression that ever worried her, not because it meant I was angry, but because it meant I had already worked something out and was waiting for the other person to catch up. Here is what no one in that room knew but me. I had been expecting every word of it. 3 weeks earlier, I had let Carlos overhear a phone call I staged on purpose. I stood near the back hallway and spoke a little too loudly about handing the restaurant to Patrick at Thanksgiving dinner. I knew Carlos would carry it to Sloane within the hour, and I knew she would see this dinner as a stage, a place to humiliate me so badly that no announcement of mine would ever be believed again. I needed her to stand up. I needed every person at this table to see who she was, in her own words, before I showed them what she had done. This dinner was never a celebration. It was a courtroom. And I had spent 10 months building the case. You spent 3 years believing I was slow, I said. Too old to feel the floor shift under my own feet. But a man does not run a kitchen for 60 years by being slow, Sloane. He learns to know, the moment someone walks through his door, what they came to take. I let it sit. I knew what you came for a long time ago. Tonight I just stopped standing in your way. Something moved behind her eyes. Not fear. Sloane did not do fear. Call it arithmetic recalculating a number she had been very sure of. I stood, lifted the cypress box from the center of the table, and set it in the cleared space between the candles and the bread. I watched her recognize it. She had tried twice to get into the safe where I kept that box. Once with Carlos's help. Once with a locksmith she sent to my house on a day she believed I was at the doctor. She knew this box. What she did not know was what I had been placing inside it. Quietly. For 10 months. Thank you for that speech, Sloane, I said. My voice came out steady. Steadier than I felt, but more than 60 years of running a kitchen in the Louisiana heat teaches a man to stay calm while everything around him goes wrong. Now it's my turn. I looked around the table, at Miss Loretta, who had set down her spoon, at the men who had hauled waterlogged timber out of this room after the flood, at Patrick, who had finally raised his head, his eyes moving between me and his wife like a man deciding which version of the world he was living in. But before I open this box, I said, I need to tell you how we got here. Because none of this began tonight. I rested my hand on the lid. It began 3 years ago. And it began, the way these things always do, with something that seemed very small. 3 years ago, I still believed in the Sloane she showed me at family dinners. Quiet, well-dressed, asking about the restaurant with real interest, refilling my coffee before I asked. I understand now she was studying the place the way a contractor studies a building before he bids. She was taking inventory. I could not see it yet. There is one thing I did see and read wrong. In all those years, she never once asked about Diane, not how she died. not the woman she'd been. I took it for a young wife's tact with an old man's grief. It would be long before I read that silence the other way. The changes started small. They almost always do. The first to go was the photograph of my grandmother in front of this restaurant in 1951. It had hung by the host's stand longer than I had been alive. One morning it was gone. Carlos said Sloan had taken it for reframing. I waited 6 months. It never came back. Then the framed menu from our first year. Then the portrait of my father, taken the year he paid off the mortgage. One by one, the things that made this place itself came off the walls, replaced by clean paint and what Sloan called a neutral palette. More professional, she said. What she meant was more hers. Diane used to say this was not a building that you could strip it to the studs, and it would still be Brennan's. Because it was never the walls. It was all of us. Watching the walls go bare that winter, I understood a person could try to empty a place of exactly that, and leave the walls standing so no one would notice. One afternoon during the repainting, a man I did not know came in with a tape measure and a camera. He walked the dining room and kitchen, writing numbers, measuring walls, photographing the bar. Sloan said he was the estimator for the paint job, and I went back to my prep. A painter does not need the square footage of my walk-in, or a photograph of the original tile. I would not let myself see it until much later. The apron was different. Diane had worn that apron the last years of her life, and I had hung it above the prep station after she died because taking it down felt like admitting something I was not ready to. One afternoon, it was gone. I found it in the trash bin behind the restaurant, folded neatly. That told me everything. You do not fold a thing neatly before you throw it away, unless you want someone to understand it was no accident. When I brought it up at dinner, Sloan looked at me with what I can only call practiced sympathy. "Oh, Walter, I'm so sorry. I thought it was an old rag." She touched Patrick's arm, and my son said, "Dad, maybe we should just let it go." I washed the apron at home that night. I hung it back on the wall. I did not bring it up again. That was around the time I started eating dinner alone. Diane's chair still sat across from mine at the kitchen table at home, the one she found on Magazine Street the year we married. Some evenings, I ate a whole meal in silence with that empty chair across from me, wondering what she would say if she could see what was happening to the family she had loved. The distance from my son widened into something I could not close. Sloan managed his calendar now, and there was always something more pressing than a call with his father. I would phone. He would not answer. I would leave a message, and 3 days later he would call back, distracted, 10 minutes before another meeting. "I've been crazy busy, Dad. You know how it is." I did not know how it was. In 40 years, I had never once been too busy for my own father. Then she went to work on how he saw me. "Poor Walter," she said one evening in front of 2 of my line cooks, her voice light and almost fond. "We just let him putter around the kitchen so he feels useful. The way you speak of an old dog that still believes it has a job." Within a week, those words came back to me from someone who thought they were being kind. And then Patrick started asking me things I had never heard from him. "Dad, do you think maybe you're overdoing it?" Sloane's worried, and once, not quite meeting my eyes. "Maybe you should see somebody, just to get checked out." And he touched his own temple. I am going to tell you the part I am least proud of. I started to believe them. There were nights I sat at that table with Diane's recipe book open, not reading it, just needing to be near her handwriting. asking the empty room whether I was slipping, whether I had become a burden. One morning I could not remember why I had walked into my own cooler, and it scared me. I stopped pushing back. For a while I let them win, because they had convinced me there was nothing in me left worth fighting with. Then one evening I walked past the office and heard Sloane through the door. "He will never let you be your own man as long as he's around," she said. "You know that." I stood in that hallway a long time and did not move. Those words did not break me, but they were the first moment I understood, beyond doubt, that what was happening to my family was not a misunderstanding, not grief, not a hard adjustment, not people learning to share something they loved. It was a plan, and I was the problem it had been built to solve. There is one more thing I have not told you about that night. Behind that door, Sloane was not talking to my son. The voice that answered her was lower than Patrick's, unhurried. A man's voice I did not know. I told myself it was the television. It was not the television. The anniversary of Diane's death falls on the third Thursday of October, every year, for that one day. I wear her ring on a chain around my neck. I started the 1st October after she died, and I have never stopped. It was not a ritual I planned. It was just something I needed. That October, I reached into the drawer for the ring, and the drawer was empty. I stood there a long time with my hand still inside it, as if I kept searching, I would feel the weight of it again. The pearl necklace her mother had given her on their wedding day. My father's pocket watch, the one I had been saving to give Patrick the day he became a father himself. The plain gold band I had slipped onto Diane's finger in a church on Canal Street on a Saturday afternoon 45 years ago. All of it gone. I called Patrick. I did not mean to accuse anyone. I only wanted to know if he had seen them. He was quiet a moment, and then he said, in the careful voice Sloane had taught him to use, "Dad, are you sure you didn't misplace them? Sloane mentioned you've been forgetting things lately." I hung up the phone and sat down at the kitchen table. 2 days later, I drove to Métairie. I had called every pawn shop within 15 miles of the restaurant, and the third one described the pieces closely enough that I already knew. The young man behind the counter was maybe 25, and he looked at me the way you look at someone when you suspect you are about to be part of something sad. The ring came to $400. The necklace, $320. The watch had already been sold to someone else, and I made myself accept that there was nothing I could do about the watch. I paid in cash. He slid the ring and the necklace across the glass in a small velvet bag. "Special occasion?" he asked. "My wife gave me this ring 45 years ago." I said, "Someone stole it." He did not say anything after that. I drove home and sat in the car in the driveway for a long while. I took the ring out of the bag and held it in my palm until it went warm. I had slipped it onto her hand myself, once, in front of God and her mother. Now I had bought it back from a stranger for $400. Then I locked the ring and the necklace in the safe beside Diane's recipe book. And I kept every receipt. A month later, my phone rang. It was Raymond Thibodeau, a retired school teacher who had been eating at Brennan's since before I was the one running it. He had driven up from Houston to try the new franchise, and he was calling me from its parking lot. "Walter," he said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but that was not your gumbo." I drove to Houston the next morning, 6 hours each way. I walked into the franchise kitchen, introduced myself to a prep cook who had no idea who I was, and asked him to show me the base. He opened a cooler. Bags of frozen shrimp shipped in from the other side of the world. Tubs of seasoning paste trucked in by the case from a food warehouse in Dallas. I picked up one of the tubs and read the label. The third ingredient was maltodextrin. I took a spoonful from the steam table and tasted it. It was warm. It was thick. It resembled gumbo the way a photograph resembles the person in it. The shape is right, but nothing in it is alive. I stood in that kitchen a long while, said nothing, thanked the boy, and drove home. That night, after we closed, I made the gumbo myself, in my own kitchen, at Brennan's. Fresh Gulf shrimp, a roux built from scratch, 6 hours, the way I have always done it. When I tasted it, something was wrong. I told myself I was tired. I made it again the next night. Same thing. Wrong in a way I could not name, like a song you know by heart. Played in the wrong key. Every note was there. The music was gone. I lay awake that third night, and finally let myself ask the question I had been running from for months. What if they were right? What if my palate had begun to fail along with my knees and the steadiness of my left hand? In October, I had forgotten why I walked into my own cooler. Now I could not taste the difference in my own gumbo. What if the one thing I had trusted my whole life, the thing that tied me to my grandmother and my father and 45 years of the same stove, had quietly started slipping away from me? There is a particular loneliness in doubting your own senses. Grief at least has a beginning you can point to. This had no origin. It was a slow coming apart from the parts of myself I had trusted the longest. And that night, I could not tell whether I was the victim of something or simply an old man at the end of his usefulness. The fourth morning, I drove to a hardware store and waited in the lot until they unlocked the doors. I bought 2 small security cameras. I mounted one above the prep station where the gumbo begins, and one near the walk-in where the ingredients are kept. I ran the cables myself, in the dark. Before anyone arrived for the breakfast shift, I told myself one thing as I locked up. If those cameras showed me my own hands making mistakes I no longer knew I was making, I would accept it. I would sit Patrick down, hand him the keys, go home, and grieve in private for the man I used to be. But if they showed me something else, then every doubt they had planted in me was a lie. And someone in my kitchen had been lying to me for a very long time. The first night's footage showed nothing. The second night, the same. By the third morning, I had nearly talked myself back into believing the problem was me. I came in before 4 and set up in the office with a cup of coffee and the camera feed open on my laptop. The kitchen sat empty on the screen. Then the back door opened, and Carlos walked in. He moved the way he always moved, unhurried. Easy. A man in his own house. He washed his hands. He checked the prep list on the wall. Then he went to the walk-in, pulled out the sealed container of fresh Gulf shrimp I had cleaned and packed the night before, and set it on the counter. He crossed to the supply closet and came back with a 10-pound bag of frozen shrimp from a distributor in Baton Rouge. He made the swap. Then he took my fresh shrimp, wrote the next morning's date on a label, and slid it back into the cooler as if it had never been touched. The whole thing took him under 3 minutes. He did the same with the seasoning my grandmother's spice mix, the one I jar by hand every Monday, lifted out and replaced with a commercial blend from a catering supply. Then he started the morning prep, certain he was alone. I sat in that office and did not move, and somewhere in those 3 minutes, the floor I had been standing on for months went still. The fresh shrimp I had cooked with 2 nights before the gumbo that came out wrong. The one that left me awake doubting my own tongue had worn a label in Carlos's handwriting. My palate had never failed me. My hands had never failed me. The ingredients were the lie. For months I had been chasing a ghost that someone else had put in my own kitchen. When I had seen enough, I closed the laptop. I walked into my kitchen and built the gumbo from the one cooler in that building that only I had a key to. 6 hours, start to finish. When I tasted it, it was exactly right. My grandmother's gumbo. A lifetime of memory in a single bowl. What I felt was not triumph. It was something cleaner and sadder than that. For months, the people I loved most had told me my judgment was going. My memory was slipping. That maybe it was time to step aside and let someone younger carry the weight. The bowl in front of me said otherwise. The kitchen had not outgrown me. I had simply been sharing it with a man who wanted it for himself. I sat down on a milk crate in the middle of that kitchen and let my breath come back. They had very nearly talked me into handing all of it over for nothing. Carlos had worked beside me for 20 years. Diane had stitched his name onto his first apron with her own hands and told me he had a good heart. And for a long time I had believed her. I said nothing to him that morning. I told him good morning. I told him the coffee was good. I smiled. And he smiled back, and holding that smile in place was one of the hardest things I have ever made my face do. Neither of us said the thing we both now knew. That was 18 months before Thanksgiving. 10 months before Thanksgiving. On a cold Tuesday at the end of January. I came in at 4 and turned on the lights over the prep station. And before I lit the burner, I did what Diane had taught me to do every morning of our marriage. I checked the gas valve. The seal was loose, not broken, not obviously touched. Wrong in a way no one would notice unless he was the kind of man who checked. Underneath the smell of last night's kitchen, there was gas, a thin, patient thread of it, seeping out since some hour in the dark. I stood there and understood exactly what I was holding. If I had not checked, if I had been distracted or forgetful, or as the people in my own family had begun to suggest a little too old for this work, I would have struck the match, and I would not have walked out of that room alive. I set the matchbook down very slowly, the way you set down a thing that has just shown you its teeth. Some mornings I still believe that valve is the only reason I am here to tell you any of this. Diane knew. That is what kept circling in me, standing in the dark with gas in my nose. She had made me check it every single morning because she understood that the day a man stops minding the small things is the day the small things stop keeping him alive. She had been gone 19 years, and she was still pulling me back from the edge of her own kitchen. I said 3 words to the empty room. Not today. Diane. I replaced the cylinder the careful way she taught me, because a thing worth doing is worth doing right even when your hands want to shake. Then I drove to the hardware store, waited for them to open, and bought 4 more cameras. That evening, I sat across from Diane's empty chair at the kitchen table at home. They tried to take me out in your kitchen, I told her. The one you went back into the water for. I sat with that a while. But you were there. You're always there. Then I took out a new notebook and wrote 3 words across the first page. Day 1, underneath. I wrote down what I was for, so I would never lose the thread of it again. Save Brennan's. Save Patrick. Make Diane proud. I closed the notebook, locked it in the drawer beside her recipe book, and went to bed. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept like a man who knew exactly what he was going to do. I had known Martha Tran for 15 years, and I had never once called her office on a Sunday morning. She answered on the second ring. Martha had handled my contracts since the year after Katrina, and when I told her I needed a private investigator. She was quiet a long moment and then said, in the plain way of a woman used to hard truths, Walter, this could get ugly. I told her I already knew that. The investigator's name was Paul Devereaux, a former police detective out of Baton Rouge, with the patience of a man who understood that the most important evidence is rarely the loudest. We met at a coffee shop on Magazine Street, 3 days after I found that loose valve, and I laid all of it out. The pawn shop receipts, the footage of Carlos, the court paperwork I had glimpsed on Sloane's desk one February afternoon when she left the office unlocked. Paul listened without interrupting and filled 3 pages of a little spiral notebook. When I finished, he asked one question. "How much time do you have?" I told him I wanted it done before Thanksgiving. That gave us 10 months. I paid Paul and Martha out of the account I had been building for 11 years. The one meant for the day Patrick would finally buy the restaurant from me and make it his own. I emptied 2/3 of it inside the first month. I will not pretend that was easy. Most of my life, spending money meant building something a new range, another cook, a better room for my customers. Spending a decade of savings to prove that someone had been robbing me did not feel like building. It felt like surgery, the kind that leaves a scar you carry the rest of your days. But it seemed right, somehow, that the money meant for my son's future would be the thing that saved it. What followed were 10 months of living 2 separate lives. By day, I was the Walter everyone expected. Slow, a little stiff in the mornings. I complimented the cooking. I talked about the weather with the lunch regulars. 3 times that month, I let Sloane catch me forgetting the name of a new server on purpose. Each time, because I wanted her certain I was exactly the man she believed I was. I became, for 10 months, one of the better actors in New Orleans. That is not a thing I am proud to be good at. But it is the truth. There is a particular exhaustion in being underestimated on purpose. You spend the daylight hours making yourself smaller to fit the box someone has built for you, smiling the whole time, and only at night, alone. Are you allowed to stand up to your full height again? At night, I was someone else. I read the documents Paul sent on a laptop I kept locked in the safe with Diane's recipe book, alone in the dark kitchen, a cup of coffee going cold at my elbow. Some nights I was there until 3 in the morning, and the picture of the woman my son had married got worse the clearer it came into focus. The falsified health inspections turned up first. Paul traced a paper trail showing Sloane had paid a contact at the inspection service to certify the Houston and Atlanta kitchens without ever walking through them. The contamination risk was real. People were eating that food, so I drove Houston one weekend, Atlanta the next. Each time arriving in the dead middle of the night, I let myself in with a key I had never returned after the original build-outs, and I worked through the dark hours pulling the spoiled and the substandard off those shelves and replacing it with my own. And I was back in New Orleans before the breakfast cruise arrived. I did it 4 times across 3 months. My knees have been bad since my late 50s, and a 12-hour drive followed by a night on my feet in a strange kitchen is not what any doctor would recommend for a man in his mid-70s. But some things you do not weigh and measure. You just do them, because they need doing and you are the one who is there. No one in those kitchens ever knew an old man had come in the night to fix what his daughter-in-law had broken. That was fine by me. Diane had not gone back into that water for thanks, either. There was one more thing I did, and I had been at it far longer than 10 months. For almost 3 years, ever since the distance between Patrick and me first opened, I had written him a letter every week. I had written to Diane this way once, before we married, when she was living with her mother up in Baton Rouge, long letters, by hand. The kind you only write to someone you cannot stop thinking about. So I wrote to Patrick about the restaurant, about the regulars who still asked after him, about things I had been remembering of his mother, about what I wanted for him, even now, even after everything. In one of them, I wrote about the morning he was born, how his mother laughed and cried at once and would not let the nurse take him. I think I needed to remember there had been a time before all of this. I wrote 156 letters. I folded each one, sealed it, wrote his name on the front, and put it in the drawer of the kitchen table at home, next to his mother's empty chair. I did not send a single one. I knew Sloane went through his mail, and a handwritten letter from his father would have made her watchful in ways I could not yet afford. But I was not ready to stop talking to my son, even if he could not hear me yet, even if the only place those words could live, for now, was a drawer in the dark. Then, on a Sunday evening in October, Paul called me. He did not waste words. He never did. "Walter," he said, "we found Derek Ashford." Paul sent the file on Derek Ashford on a Thursday evening in late September. I read it twice before I could take it in. Derek Ashford, 34, Vice President of Business Development at Magnolia Food Group, a Nashville corporation that had spent 7 years quietly swallowing regional restaurant chains across the South. Divorced. There were photographs. I made myself look at all of them. Over 6 months. Sloane met Derek Ashford 14 times at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta. The first fell 3 weeks after she told Patrick she wanted to start going to the gym more. The pictures showed them arriving together, leaving together, the timestamps marked in the corner. My son had believed she was on a treadmill, and I remembered the voice behind the office door 3 years before. Low, unhurried. A man's voice I had told myself was the television. Now it had a name. There was a second folder. I almost wish there had not been. For nearly a year, Sloane had been negotiating the sale of Brennan's to Magnolia. $4,200,000. The trademark, the recipes, the original room on Magazine Street, all of it. Magnolia's plan, spelled out on the 3rd page, was to gut the place into a fast casual chain they were calling Coastal Southern Kitchen. The name Brennan's would be retired within 18 months of closing. I thought of the man who had walked my dining room 3 years ago with a tape measure and a camera. He had never worked for any painter. Sloane had been pricing this building before Magnolia had a name for it. My grandfather raised these walls in 1949. My father kept them standing through every disaster this city could invent. I pulled them out of the mud myself after the water went down. And it was all going to become a coastal southern kitchen. There was one more page, a separate consulting agreement, signed in Sloane's maiden name, payable on close, $1,800,000. Patrick was not a party to it. He was not even going to see the money. She was not selling the restaurant to give my son a better life. She was selling it out from under him and keeping the larger share for herself. Martha called the next morning with the rest of it. There was a petition filed in Orleans Parish Civil District Court, a preliminary inquiry into my competency, opened in my own name by an attorney I had never met. Attached to it was a sworn declaration listing 11 incidents of cognitive decline over 14 months, forgotten names, missed appointments, a man seen wandering near his own restaurant at night, and a report from the Dr. Sloane had been so kind as to recommend to me. 11 ordinary moments of my life, each true enough on its own, arranged into the portrait of a man losing his mind. I had gone to that doctor twice, trusting him. Before I understood the visits were never about my health. I want to be clear about what I understood in that moment. because it is the part that still keeps me up. She was not trying to rob me. A thief takes your money and goes. Sloane was trying to erase me, to reach back through everything I had built and empty it out, then set it back on the shelf so that from the outside it looked untouched. The way you can pour out a jar, fill it with water, and no one knows the difference until they open it. Paul had pulled one more thing from her account. An email to the petition attorney, dated 8 weeks before Thanksgiving. 3 sentences, 2 or 3 more incidents, and the court will declare him unfit to manage his own affairs. Once that happens, Patrick becomes sole trustee, and then we have everything we need. This is almost done. I sat with those words a long time. Almost done. So I gave her one last reason to believe it. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. I sat Carlos down after closing and slid a folder across the desk linen invoices, a pest control renewal, a handwritten note to Patrick about a leaking sink. Nothing in it but the dull business of a tired old man. I asked him to make sure Patrick saw it before the holiday. I knew it would be in Sloane's hands by midnight, and exactly what she would conclude from it, that I had no idea what was coming. The Thanksgiving invitation went out the next day. Sloane confirmed within 2 hours. I thought I had everything I needed. But there was one fact in Paul's file that had lodged in me and would not come loose. He had pushed the start of Sloane and Patrick back further than anyone in my family had ever admitted, back into the summer of 2005. The summer of the storm. For 19 years, I had told myself that Diane drowned because the water rose faster than the rescue could reach her. A tragedy with no villain, which is the worst kind, because there is no one to blame but the sky. But I lay awake that night with the summer of the storm circling, and a thing I had long filed under kindness turned over and showed me its other face. In all those years, Sloane had never once asked how Diane died. The woman who asked about everything in this place, the recipes, the books. The deed had stepped around that one night like a hole in the floor. I had called it tact. Now I wondered what a person steps around when they already know what is lying at the bottom of it. On a Sunday night, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I called Paul. "One more thing," I said. "I need you to find a recording, a 911 call, from the night Katrina made landfall. August 29th, 2005. Someone trying to get help to 4871 Magazine Street. The line was quiet a moment. "Walter," he said, "what are you expecting to find?" I looked across the kitchen at Diane's apron, hanging where it has always hung. "The truth about how my wife died," I said. The recording came into Paul's system on a Thursday, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. He had pulled it through a public records request to the New Orleans Office of Emergency Preparedness, which had kept archived transcripts of every call made during the storm. There were thousands of them. This one took Paul less than a week to find. The file sat unopened on my laptop for nearly 2 weeks. I'm still not sure why I waited. I think part of me understood that once I heard it, certain things would become impossible to unknow, and part of me was still defending the version of that night I had carried for 19 years, the one where Diane went back alone, where the water came faster than anyone could have guessed, where the rescue simply did not reach her in time. The version with no villain in it. The version where the only thing left to blame was the sky. I opened it at 2 o'clock in the morning, the night before Thanksgiving. The recording was 43 seconds long. The sound was poor, thinned, and crushed by whatever the emergency center was running that night, but the voice came through clear enough. I knew it at once. I had been hearing that voice across my own dinner table for 16 years. It was Sloane. I want to tell you what it is to hear a familiar voice inside a recording you were never meant to hear. It is not like remembering. It is like the floor giving way under your feet. For one moment, I told myself I was wrong, that grief and exhaustion were playing a trick on a tired old man at 2 a.m. So I played it again. I was not wrong. She gave the address as 4817 Magazine Street. The number was 4871. 2 digits. Turned around. That was all. In the middle of a hurricane, with the water climbing the streets and the city coming apart outside every window, 2 numbers in the wrong order. The operator read it back to her. She said yes. She confirmed it. Then the line went dead. I played it again and again. 7 times in all. Alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m, with Diane's apron on the wall across the room. Each time, I watched my own hand tighten and loosen around the rim of my coffee cup. I was not aware I was doing it. The rescue team went to 4817 first. The address is real, a closed pharmacy. 3 blocks from this restaurant. They spent 40 minutes searching for the person in trouble before the dispatcher reached them with the right location. By the time they found 4871, the water was over the second-floor windows. Diane was on the second floor. They found her still holding the recipe book. For 19 years, I had believed my wife drowned because a storm moved faster than men could move. I told myself that so many times I stopped examining it. A tragedy with no one to be angry at but the weather. I stood at her grave and felt guilt, but never rage. I blamed myself for not going back with her. I blamed the levees. I blamed the storm itself, as if the sky could be held to account. Not once in 19 years did it occur to me that there had been a living person on the other end of a telephone who could have made a different choice. And that person had been sitting at my table, saying my wife's name out loud, every Thanksgiving for 16 years. And tomorrow, that same voice would sit down at my table again and smile at me and have no idea I had finally heard it. I sat in the dark a long time after the 7th play. Then I picked up Diane's recipe book, the one she died holding. The one that came out of the flood because she believed it was worth more than her own life. For months I had meant to take it to someone who could separate the pages the water had sealed shut. I had never found the time. That night I found the time. I worked through them slowly, with a letter opener and a patience I did not know I still had. Most of them came apart without harm, and near the back, in the section where Diane kept her notes instead of her recipes, I found 2 pages that had been folded before the water reached them, sealed together along the edge. I separated them the way you open something that belongs to someone else. Slowly, knowing that whatever was inside had been meant to stay private. It was a letter, in Diane's hand, in the blue ink she used for everything that mattered, dated the morning before the storm came ashore. I will not tell you yet what it said. Some things have to be heard in the right room, with the right people in it. What I can tell you is that she had written it in the same steady hand she used for 40 years of recipes and Sunday grocery lists, unhurried, clear, as if she had all the time in the world. I read it once. Then I folded it back along its crease, set it between the pages, closed the cover, and held the book against my chest in the quiet of my kitchen until the worst of it passed. Then I drove to the restaurant. I set the cypress box on the shelf beneath Diane's apron. I stood a long while in the middle of the empty dining room and looked at the tables, the chairs, the photographs that had found their way back onto the walls over the years. the ones that mattered, the ones no one had managed to take from me for good. Tomorrow, Diane, I said to the empty room. Tomorrow I finish this. I turned off the lights, I locked the door, and I walked home through the New Orleans dark, ready for the morning that was coming. By the time I reached the end of how we got here, I had been talking a long while. The candles had burned down. No one was eating anymore. The room held the stillness of people who understand they are present at something that cannot be taken back. I set my hands flat on the table and stood up. Now, I said, let me show you what I found. The first thing I took from the box was a single laminated sheet. 2 columns, side by side. The left was headed Original Brennan's Gumbo, as written by Eloise Brennan, 1949. The right Current Franchise Preparation, this October. I read it aloud, because some things must be said in a room before people believe them. Left column, fresh Gulf shrimp, bought daily. Roux from scratch, 45 minutes at the stove. Andouille from Camo's, cook time, 6 hours. I let that settle. Right column, imported frozen shrimp, bulk bag. Commercial seasoning blend out of a food service catalog. Industrial roux base, reconstituted from a tub. Cook time, 45 minutes. I set the sheet down. That is what the Brennan's name has been serving in Houston and Atlanta for 14 months. My grandmother spent 30 years getting that recipe right. She died believing it would outlast her by 100 years. Most of them had eaten the real thing for 40 years. Some had watched Diane make it standing at that stove before the doors opened, stirring without being told. Because she believed you could always taste when a thing was rushed. Sloane straightened in her chair. It's called efficiency. Walter, the franchise margins required adjustments. Patrick approved them. I looked at my son. He shook his head. Barely. But I saw it. He did not, I said. And you knew that when you signed his name. I set the second folder on the table and opened it. Health inspection certificates for the Houston and Atlanta kitchens, both marked as passing a full review this spring. I laid the next pages beside them. And these are the purchase invoices for those kitchens, over those same months. Anyone who has run a kitchen knows the food on these invoices does not pass any inspection worth the paper. Hector leaned in. He had inspected restaurants in this city for 30 years. And known my father. He read the 2 pages without a word, and when he sat back, his face said everything that needed saying. The certificates were bought. I said, I have already filed with the Louisiana Department of Health and with the FDA. The inspector who signed off on both kitchens without ever walking through them is cooperating with the investigation. I watched Sloane take in that last word. Investigation. She held very still, working out which direction the danger was coming from. Then she made her move. She set down her glass, turned to the table, and her voice found its footing again, warm, reasonable, wounded. Do you all see what is happening here? She looked around at faces she had known for years. A grieving old man hears one complaint about a recipe and builds a federal case out of it. This is exactly what I have spent 3 years protecting this family from. She turned to Patrick. You told me yourself you were worried about him. It was a good move. 3 weeks earlier it might have worked. She had spent 2 years teaching this room to believe precisely that. I did not raise my voice. The strongest answer to a lie is not a louder one. It is the next piece of paper. I set down the third folder. This is the money moved through the franchise accounts over the past 22 months. $380,000. taken out in pieces 10, 15, 20,000 at a time, and booked each time as a consulting fee. I turned it toward Patrick. Every one of those payments went to the same man, Derek Ashford, and the signature authorizing every transfer is yours. Patrick set down the inspection pages and pulled the printout toward him. He read in silence. I watched his finger move down the column of signatures. Slow. The way a man checks a thing he already knows the answer to and prays he is wrong. Sure, that is not my signature, he said quietly. No, I said, it is not. I laid the last page on top. A handwriting analysis. Prepared by an independent examiner, 3 pages of comparison, and 1 sentence that did the work of all of them. The signatures were not consistent with Patrick's hand and were assessed, with high confidence, to be forgeries. Patrick read that sentence twice. Then he set the page down with great care, as if it might break. And he looked at his wife. She did not look back. She had not only taken the money, she had taken it in his name, his signature. The company seal she had handed back as proof, so that if any of it ever surfaced, the thief the law came looking for would be him. I had watched my son make himself small in room after room for 16 years. I had watched him stop laughing, stop calling, stop being a man who belonged fully to himself. Something in his face was coming apart now along an old seam, and I understood that whatever happened tonight, nothing between him and Sloane would ever go back to what it had been. Sloane. Her name came out of him in 2 flat syllables, like a word in a language he was only learning to hear. She reached for her wine. This time she drank, and I will tell you the truth of what I felt. Standing over that open box. Every folder I had laid down was real, and every one mattered, and not one of them was why my hand was shaking. I knew what was still in the box. I knew the part that was going to break my son's heart, and it had nothing to do with money. I have more, I said. I rested my hand on the lid. But the money was not the worst of it. Not by a long way. I took a manila folder from the box and set it open in the middle of the table. This is a filing from Orleans Parish Civil District Court, I said. A petition to have me declared incompetent opened in my own name, by an attorney I have never met. Attached to it is a sworn statement listing 11 incidents of my supposed decline. I turned it so the room could see. Forgotten names, missed appointments, a man seen wandering near his own restaurant late at night. I let that one sit. That last one was me, installing security cameras. After I found that someone had loosened the gas line, I light a burner over every morning. The forgotten employees were people Sloane hired, knowing I would not recognize them. The confusion happened at a franchise she had redesigned without telling me, and the doctor whose name is on this report was the doctor she sent me to. These were people who had known me 30 years and longer. Some of them had been told, quietly, over those same months, that poor Walter was beginning to slip. I watched them understand all at once what they had been told, and who had been telling them. There was a small sound at the far end of the table. Miss Loretta set down her coffee cup. She had known my family for 40 years, and she was looking at Sloane now the way a woman looks at a thing she has finally understood is dangerous. Patrick's chair scraped back an inch. He was not standing. He was trying to put distance between himself and what he was hearing. He looked at that filing the way you look at a thing that might bite his own wife's design in a courthouse, with his father's name across the top. She filed papers, he said, with a court. To take you. Yes, I said. It has been withdrawn. The attorney is cooperating now, and Sloane finally spoke. I was protecting our future. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. Your father has been putting this family at risk for years. Somebody had to make sure the assets were safe for when he could no longer. Whose future? Patrick said. He did not raise his voice. The words came out flat, set down rather than thrown. Your name is on that consulting agreement. Your account took the $380,000. So whose future were you protecting? Sloane. She looked around the table. I watched her do it, checking each face for one person who might give her cover. She found no one. She set her hands in her lap and said nothing. Protecting our future. I had heard her say protecting the family more than once across those years, and every time I had let it pass. But I knew something now that no one else at that table knew. I knew what this woman had done the last time she decided who in our family was worth saving. I pressed my hand flat to the table and kept it behind my teeth. That part had a moment of its own coming. I reached into the box again. These are photographs, I said. 14 of them. I laid them out across the table in 2 rows of 7, each one stamped with a date and a place. The first showed Sloane crossing the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta on a January evening, a weekend bag over her shoulder and a man's hand resting at the small of her back. Patrick looked at them for a long moment without touching anything. Then he picked up the first one. He did not skip a single one. He did not look up. 16 years of a marriage, laid out in 2 rows of 7, and he made himself look at every frame of it. I watched his hands move from photograph to photograph with the careful control of a man holding himself back from doing something else entirely. When he reached the last one, he laid it on top of the others and pressed both palms flat against the table. Who is he? He said. It was not a question. Derek Ashford, I said. The same man your $380,000 has been going to all year. I watched my son set the 2 facts beside each other. The money, the hotel, the same name on both. Sloane straightened in her chair. And when she came back swinging. I think you hired someone to follow me. Her voice had turned hard. A private investigator, watching me for months. That is a violation of my privacy, and any attorney in this state would take it seriously. She turned to the table, to the friends, to Patrick. This is a grieving old man who cannot accept that his time is over. A man who has spent years turning his own son against the people who were only ever trying to help him. Look at what he has built tonight, out of a few photographs and a wounded ego, for one breath. I felt the room tilt toward her. She was good. She had spent 2 years building exactly this doubt in exactly these people, and a frightened part of me wondered whether it might still hold. But desperation has a sound, and everyone at that table heard it under her words. No one moved to help her. I let her finish. Then I spoke, and I kept my voice low, because the quiet of it stopped her more completely than any shout would have. He is not only your boyfriend, Sloane. I held her eyes. He is the man you have been sitting across a table from for 11 months, negotiating. About this restaurant. The room went very still. She was not only sleeping with him. Patrick, I said. She was making a deal with him. Patrick did not say a word. But I watched the last of something go out of his face, the last piece of the man who had spent 16 years finding reasons to believe her. I set the last folder on the table and opened the cover. Patrick reached for it before I had let go. Patrick read the term sheet without looking up. He turned to the first page, then the second, then the last. His face did not show the loud kind of distress that announces itself. It showed something quieter and far more serious, the gravity of a man meeting a thing he will never be able to forget. He set it down. $4,200,000, I said. A full sale. The trademark. The recipes. This room on Magazine Street. The name over the door. Magnolia's plan is on the third page. They gutted into a fast casual chain called Coastal Southern Kitchen. The name Brennan's is retired within 18 months of closing. Patrick looked up from the page for the first time in minutes. You were going to sell this restaurant, he said to his wife. It is an asset, Sloan said. An underperforming asset in a high-cost market, with aging infrastructure and a customer base that is literally dying off. The rational business decision. You were going to sell my great-grandmother's restaurant. Patrick, this is not a shrine. It is a business. And your father has run it like a memorial instead of an enterprise for 20 years. The restaurant my mother died trying to save. His voice had gone very low. You were going to sell that to a fast food company and paint a new name on the front. Sloan set her glass down with a small, deliberate sound. It is just a building. Patrick. The room dropped a degree colder than it had been. I had been waiting all night for her to say those exact words. Because there is no lie a person tells that reveals them more completely than the truth they let slip by accident. It is not a building, I said. It is the kitchen where your great-grandmother learned to cook, from a woman who came up through the Depression and kept a family fed on almost nothing. It is the room where your grandfather served his first plate of food at 12 years old, and where I served mine at the same age. It is where your mother spent every Sunday morning of her life making bread pudding for no reason at all, except that she loved this place and believed it deserved care. It is the room she walked back into during a hurricane, in the dark, in rising water, because she believed it was worth protecting. I let the silence hold. And you called it just a building. Sloan looked back at me without flinching. To her, it really was just a building, a number she had been waiting years to collect. That was the part it had taken me the longest to believe. Not that she was cruel. That underneath all of it, she felt nothing at all. There is also the separate agreement, I said. And I drew the last page from the folder and laid it down. Signed in your maiden name. Payable the day the sale closes. $1,800,000. Patrick was not a party to it. He was never told it existed. Patrick looked at the page. Then he looked at his wife. And I watched the arithmetic move across his face, the arithmetic he did not want to finish. You were going to take $1,800,000, he said slowly, out of the sale of my family's restaurant, under a name that wasn't even the one you married me with, and not tell me. Sloan opened her mouth. Patrick looked away before she could fill it. 16 years he had defended this woman in room after room. I watched him understand, at last, that she had married him for the arithmetic, and that the arithmetic had never once included him. I stood up and turned toward the kitchen door. Carlos, I said, come on out here. There was a stillness from the kitchen, the kind that falls when a man who has been listening stops pretending he is not. Then the door swung open, and Carlos stepped through it. Still in his apron, the apron Diane had stitched his name onto in navy thread. The first Christmas he worked here, 20 years ago. He stood in the middle of the dining room and looked at no one. I took the last folder from the box and opened it. These are emails. I said. Sent from Carlos's account to Sloane's, over 14 months. The combination to the safe where I keep Diane's book, my weekly schedule, things about my health I had told him in private, because I trusted him, because he had been here longer than some of these chairs. Everyone sent inside a day of the conversation it came from. The room was very still. Carlos looked at the floor. I had known Carlos since he was 22 years old. There is a particular grief in being betrayed by a man you would once have trusted with your own life. And I was standing in the middle of it. Diane loved you, I said. She stitched your name on that apron with her own hands. She told me you were the kind of man who would be family one day. Carlos made a sound that did not quite become a word. And I believed her. For a long time, so did I. His eyes were wet. His jaw worked at something he could not find the shape of. I did not tell him to leave. I did not ask him to explain. I simply turned away from him the way you turn from something you loved that has become something you can no longer stand to look at. And he went back through the kitchen door, and it swung shut behind him. I would think about that apron for a long time afterward. About what Diane used to say, that a good heart is still a good heart, even after someone has put it to the wrong use. The dining room waited. Now, I said, and I reached into the box one last time. There is the recording. I set a small recording device on the table, between the breadbasket and the last of the candles. It was the kind that fits in a shirt pocket, the kind Paul's man had been carrying at the coffee shop on Magazine Street. The October afternoon, Sloane met Derek Ashford to talk about what was taking so long. Paul had warned me before he sent it. This one will be hard to hear, he said. I told him I already knew that. I pressed play. The recording ran 22 minutes. The part that mattered began about 7 in. Once the shop had emptied and the voices came clear. Sloane's voice, and the man's I had come to know from the other tapes. I let the first part run. Then Sloane said it. I say, Patrick is the easiest man I have ever managed. You tell him he's smart, and he'll believe anything you say after it. I worked that out in the first month. I stopped the recording. The table was perfectly silent. Miss Loretta was watching Patrick. Hector had laid both hands flat on the cloth. Not one person in that room was looking at Sloane. I made myself look at my son. 16 years of being told he was brilliant. Every single time she needed something from him, and now he was hearing the engine of it, in her own voice, in a coffee shop, spoken to another man. He had gone the color of ash. I pressed play again. Derek said something I could not quite make out. Sloane laughed the easy, comfortable laugh of a woman entirely sure of herself. And then she said the thing I had braced for and still was not ready for. His mother dying was the best thing that could have happened to our timeline. It broke the old man, and it left Patrick desperate for somebody to tell him what to do. He's been looking for a replacement for her ever since. I was available. I stopped the recording. I want to tell you what it was to sit in that room and hear her call my wife's death the best thing that could have happened. Because I was the only person at that table who knew it had not been an accident of the storm. I knew whose voice had given the wrong address into a telephone in the dark. So when she said our timeline, I heard the whole shape of it at once, and I had to set both hands flat on the table to keep from saying the thing I was saving for last. Around the table, the people who had loved Diane sat with their eyes down. To hear her death called convenient in this room. By this woman took something out of the air that did not come back. Patrick had not moved. You meant it, he said. His voice came out scraped clean. You meant every word. I was venting. People say things in private they would never. You meant it. Quieter the second time, which made it heavier. And then Sloane turned to me. And for the first time all night, she looked at me like a person she actually needed to reach. You have spent years building this, she said. Compiling, photographing, turning my own husband against me at his father's table on a holiday. What kind of man does that to his family? The kind, I said, whose daughter-in-law has been lying to him for 16 years. Something in Sloane's face changed then. Not crumpled, the way a guilty person's does smoothed. The way a card player's does when the bluff is spent and only the math is left. The warmth went out of her like a light switched off in an empty room. What sat there afterward was the thing I had spent 10 months learning to see. I took the last item from the box. A single sheet, sealed in a protective sleeve. This is an email, I said. Sloane sent it to a college friend about 10 days before she married my son. I slid it across to Patrick. He read it the way a man reads his own death certificate slowly, checking the name. Then he read it aloud, in a voice with nothing left in it. The restaurant alone is worth $3 million. The old man can't live forever. This is the easiest investment I will ever make. He set the page down and laid both hands flat on top of it, as if it might get up and leave if he let go. So you never loved me, he said. Not on our wedding day. Not the day you said yes. Not a single morning of 16 years. Sloane looked at him a long moment. And then, with the deliberate steadiness that is its own kind of cruelty, she said, people are more complicated than you give them credit for, Patrick. People change, I said. Predators do not. Patrick stood up, slowly. He was not the man who had sat down at this table tonight. Something had settled in him that could not be unsettled, and it changed the way he held his own body. He looked down at his wife from his full height, and she did not look away this time. How long, he said. How long has all of it been a lie? Sloane said nothing. I looked at my son standing over the woman he had married, and I thought of the boy he used to be, the one who sat at my kitchen table on Sunday mornings telling me about books, before all of that got buried. There he was. There was the man Diane and I raised. I was proud of him. Not of what was breaking in that room, of the man who was standing up in the middle of it. Sit down, son, I said. There is one more thing, the last thing. And here my voice did something I had not let it do all evening. It wavered. Just once. This one is about your mother. There is something I have to tell you about the night Katrina came ashore, I said. About what happened before the water reached this part of the city. And about a young woman named Sloane who had been seeing my son for 3 months. Patrick looked at me. The name had landed differently than anything else all night. 3 months, he said. 3 months, I said. Which means she was with you the night the storm came. I did not know that then. Your mother did not know it. We knew you had a girl. We did not yet know her name. You were going to bring her to dinner the following month. I let it sit. The following month. Your mother had been in the ground 4 weeks. The room had gone so quiet, I could hear the rain against the glass. I watched my son try to hold 2 things in the same mind, the wife he had built a life around, and a girl he had been seeing for 12 weeks in the worst summer of his life. He had never once set them side by side. He was doing it now. The night the water came up, I said. Your mother called you. She was here, at this restaurant, on the 2nd floor, with the recipe book in her hands and the water climbing the stairs, and the phone lines across the city were failing one by one. She needed someone on the outside to reach help before the lines went down. So she called the one number she trusted most in the world. She called her son. She did not call the fire department first. She did not call a neighbor. In the last clear minutes, she had. A mother in rising water reached for her child, and the hands that took that call were not his. Patrick was very still. "You were with Sloan that night," I said. And Sloan was the one who answered. Sloan was the one who made the call. I took an older playback unit from the box. Paul had needed it, because the file came from 19 years and a whole lifetime of technology ago. This is the 911 call placed for 4871 Magazine Street on the 29th of August, 2005, 10:47 at night. About 35 minutes after your mother first tried to get help. The city keeps every storm response call in an archive. Paul requested it. They sent it. Sloan had gone very still. Not the stillness of a person who is shocked. The stillness of a person who hears a thing they buried a long time ago beginning to come up through the floor. Before I play it," I said, "I am going to tell you what is on it, so that you are ready." The room gave me a kind of attention. I do not think I had been given in my whole life the complete, held attention of people who understand that the next minute is going to change the shape of every minute that comes after it. The caller gives the address as 4817 Magazine Street. Your mother was at 4871. 2 numbers, turned around. I let that land. For 40 years, your mother wrote that address on invoices and checks and the backs of photographs. 4871. The one night it had to be right. It came out of a different mouth, in the wrong order. The rescue boat went to 4817 first. It is a real address, a shuttered pharmacy, 3 blocks from where we are sitting right now. They spent 40 minutes there, searching for someone who was not there, before the dispatcher reached them with the right number. I paused. The water at 4871 was rising the entire time. There were people at that table who had lived that night in their own bodies. Miss Loretta lost her house to that storm. Hector spent 3 days on a roof before the boats came for him. To the people in this room, Katrina was not history. It was something they still carried under their skin. Some of them had made calls like that one, into phones that rang in empty offices while the water came up. They knew, better than anyone alive, what 40 minutes was worth on a night like that. I watched it move across their faces as they understood what I was telling them. For 19 years, I said, I believed your mother drowned because the storm was faster than the men who came for her. I said it standing at her grave. I told it to you when you were old enough to ask. I believed it because the other thing was unbearable, that there had been a living person on a telephone who could have said 4 numbers in the right order, and did not. I let that breathe. When Paul found this recording, he called me before he sent it. He told me I should sit down. I told him I was already standing, and that I intended to stay that way. I had buried my wife once already, 19 years ago, in the version of the story where no one was to blame. Tonight I was burying that version too, and it was harder than the first. I looked at Sloan one last time before I played it. She was not looking at me. She was not looking at her husband. She was looking down at the table, at the empty place in front of her where there was nothing to see but the thing she had been carrying for 19 years. She knew what was on this recording. She had always known. Patrick had not spoken in a long time. He was looking at the side of his wife's face the way you look at a stranger who has been wearing the clothes of someone you love. Well, this, I said, is the voice of the person who made the call. I pressed play. The recording was 43 seconds long. The first 15 were wind and rain, and something far off that might have been a siren, or might only have been the storm finding its voice. Then the operator came on, that trained calm they keep no matter what is happening on the other end of the line. And then, through the static, a voice. Every person in that room knew it. I watched it reach Patrick, the voice he had woken up beside for 16 years, coming to him now out of the worst night of his life, saying the wrong numbers into the dark. The address came at about the 20-second mark. 4817 Magazine Street, not 4871. The operator read it back. The voice said, "Yes, that's right." Then the line went dead. I stopped the recording. The rescue boat went to 4817 first. I said, 40 minutes, looking for someone who was not there. By the time they reached 4871, the water was above the second-floor windows. I made myself finish it. Your mother was found on the second floor. She was still holding the recipe book. I let the room sit in what 40 minutes means in a drowning city. In the dark, what it means to a woman on a second floor. Holding a thing she believed was worth saving. No one at that table needed me to explain it. Most of them had lived their own 40 minutes that night. If they had been given the right address, I said, they would have reached her in time. Patrick was looking at his wife. "You killed my mother," he said. It was not loud. It came out the way a man states a fact he has just finished checking flat and final and past the reach of any argument. Sloane had gone white. Her hands were in her lap. It was a mistake. Her voice cracked on it. I was panicking. The phones were terrible. The water was everywhere. I was 25, and my boyfriend's mother was trapped. And I gave the wrong numbers. It was an accident. People make mistakes when they are terrified. And here is the truth I will not hide from you. For a moment, that almost landed. I could see the frightened girl she was describing, and if that had been the whole of it, I think I could have forgiven her. I had spent 19 years forgiving the storm itself. The operator read the address back to you, I said, and you said yes. I wasn't thinking. I was frightened. You made a mistake. I kept my voice level. And then you waited 19 years to say a word about it. That was the line. And everyone in the room felt it fall. The wrong address was a mistake. Sloane. I can almost hold that in my hand. But everything that came after it was a decision. You married my son 3 years later. You sat at this table every Thanksgiving for 16 years. You looked me in the eye every October when I wore her ring, and you said her name out loud. And let me believe you grieved her too. My voice did not rise. It did not have to. And tonight, in this room, in front of the people who buried her, you called her death the best thing that ever happened to you. Down the table, one of the men stood up. He was not rude about it. He simply could not stay in the room. He walked to the door and went out into the rain. Miss Loretta had both hands pressed over her mouth. Patrick had not moved. You let me blame myself, he said. His voice had found the lowest place it had. For 19 years. For not going back with her. For not being the one who answered the phone when she called. I have lain awake believing that if I had picked up instead of you, my mother would still be alive. He looked at her. You sat across from me at her birthday. every single year. And you let me carry that. 19 years of a guilt that was never his. She had watched him take it up and let him, because a son who blamed himself would never once think to look at her. Sloane opened her mouth. Nothing came out of it. Then explain the rest. Patrick said, not the address. The 19 years. Marrying me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she said a thing I do not think she meant to let out. There was a year I almost told you. She was not looking at him, or at me, only at the middle of the table. At nothing. The third one. We were happy. You won't believe that now. But we were. One night I got as far as the kitchen with the whole of it ready in my mouth, and then I thought about what this place would be worth one day, and I went back to bed. There were no tears in it. She said it almost wondering at herself, the way you describe a turn you once took on a road and have never stopped driving, and that, more than the wrong numbers, was what I could not forgive. The address belonged to a frightened girl, but the woman at 30 had stood in her own kitchen with the truth in her mouth, weighed what it would cost her, and chosen the money. She had met her own conscience, and priced it, and sold it. The candles had nearly gone out. The last one guttered twice and went dark, and the room dropped into the half-light from the kitchen pass and the gray of the street. I reached out and picked up the recipe book. There is one last thing, I said. Something your mother wrote, the night before the storm came ashore. I found it last night, in the small hours. Separating 2 pages the flood had sealed together 19 years ago. I held the book a moment. I read it once, alone, before dawn. I was not ready to read it aloud to anyone until now. I opened the book to the back. Where Diane kept her notes on the dishes, she was still working out her handwriting looser there. Less careful. The way a person writes when they are thinking out loud, rather than setting something down for good. Near the last page were the 2 sheets I had separated in the dark before dawn. The paper still warped, where 19 years of dried floodwater had sealed them together. The ink was the blue she used for everything that mattered. The date at the top was the 28th of August, 2005, the morning before the storm, the morning before she decided to go back. I'm reading this to you, I said, because it belongs to all of us. Not only to me. I had read these words once already, alone, in the hours before dawn. But reading them on a page by yourself is one thing. Reading them aloud, in your wife's voice, to a room full of the people she loved, is something else entirely. They had a weight on the air they had never had on the page. I began, Walter, if something happens tonight, I need you to know a few things. I know this restaurant is not a building. I know you know that. But I need you to hear me say it in writing, so that on the days when someone tries to talk you out of it, you can come back to this page and remember, this restaurant is our love. It is your grandfather's hands and your father's stubbornness, and every Sunday morning I have ever spent in that kitchen. It is not worth more than you are, but it is worth protecting. Don't ever let anyone take it from you. Patrick had both hands flat on the table. He was not looking at anything I could see. Could give this book to Patrick when he's ready. You'll know when. So will he. He has more of his grandfather in him than the 2 of you realize. And one day, that is going to be plain to everybody. Don't lose your patience with him before it is. I looked at my son as I read it. He was a grown man hearing his mother. 19 years gone. Tell him she had seen something in him no one else had, and telling his father to wait for it to arrive. I watched it reach him. Whatever Sloane had spent 16 years burying in him, that one sentence went down underneath it and touched something that was still alive. I had to stop a moment. I had not braced for that line, and it caught me somewhere I was not guarding. I read the rest more slowly. Moira and Walter, I love you. I have always loved you. I loved you the first time I watched you drop a whole pot of gumbo on your own shoes and carry on like nothing had happened. I have loved you every single morning of this marriage. I have loved you in every way a person can love the one they wake up beside. Don't eat dinner alone for too long. I closed the book 45 years ago. Those shoes. She had laughed until she cried, and I had wanted to marry her on the spot. And even now, on the morning before the worst night of her life, with the water coming, she had made room to remember it. That was who she was. She knew me, too. Even then, she knew exactly how I would try to grieve her alone, at a table set for one, and she told me not to. It would take me 19 years to start listening. The room was making the sound a room makes when grown men and women are trying very hard not to be heard. Patrick had his face in his hands. Miss Loretta was not trying to hide hers. Outside, the rain had thickened against the glass, and it made the whole world past the windows look like it belonged to some other, gentler night. I held the book against my chest for a while. This book she had gone back into the water for, because she believed it was worth more than her own safety. I thought about what it had cost her, and what it had just given back to this room. Then I set it down and looked at Sloane, not with anger. The anger had burned out before dawn this morning, alone in my kitchen. The 7th time I made myself listen to that recording. What was left was quieter and colder and, I think, more honest than anger ever is. My wife died holding this book, I said, because she believed this family was worth saving. You have spent 16 years trying to prove her wrong. I let it land. She wins. She always wins. Patrick lifted his face out of his hands. He looked at his wife for a long moment. And then, in the steadiest voice he had used all night, he said, "Get out of my mother's restaurant. Get out. And don't ever come back." Sloane looked around the table one more time. She was still looking for the one face that might give her somewhere to stand. She did not find it. She stood up. There was nothing graceful left in it. She caught the edge of the table and set her wine glass rocking, and she crossed the dining room to the front door with the unsteady walk of a person who has lost the thing that had been holding her upright all these years. The bell above the door rang when she opened it. It rang again when it closed behind her. 16 years she had spent making herself the most important person in every room she walked into. She left this one without a single soul turning to watch her go. The dining room stayed perfectly still, and then, slowly, one breath at a time, the people around that table began to breathe again. The guests left the way. People leave a place after something has shifted that will not shift back. Miss Loretta was the last of the regulars to go. She took my face in both her hands, the way she had at Diane's graveside, and looked at me with the flat directness of a woman who has spent 80 years refusing to look away from hard things. She did not say anything. She did not need to. She squeezed once, firmly, and went to the door. and the bell rang as she stepped out into the rain. Then it was just Patrick and me. He had not moved from his chair since Sloane walked out. His elbows were on the table and his head was bowed a little. The posture of a man taking inventory of something large. I brought 2 cups of coffee from the kitchen and sat down across from him. The candle holders were empty now. The only light came from over the kitchen pass, and outside the rain kept on, steady and soft against the glass. "Dad," Patrick said. "I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize for tonight," I said. "Just sit with me a while." So we sat, and I had forgotten what it felt like to sit in quiet with my son. Sloane had filled every silence she was ever in, with noise and motion and the low, constant hum of a person who always needed to be managing something. Without her, the room had a kind of space in it I had not felt in years. "How did you know?" Patrick said finally. "How did you see what she was before any of the rest of us could?" I thought about that. "You stopped laughing," I said. "That was the first thing. Not all at once, but over time. You used to laugh like your mother with your whole face, your whole body. A few years into the marriage, that just stopped. I would tell you something that should have made you laugh, and you would smile and look at her first, to see if it was allowed." Patrick said nothing. "Your mother laughed like that every day of her life," I said. "At my jokes, at her own, at nothing at all. It was the first thing I ever loved about her, and watching it go out of you was like losing a piece of her a second time. Why, she taught you that the world was a dangerous place that needed watching every minute," I said. "That love meant being held accountable for things that were never your fault. She built you a world that was very small and very demanding, and you fit yourself inside it because you trusted her. That is not weakness, son. That is what a person does for someone they love." He was looking at his hands. "Your mother always said I was too trusting," I said. "After she died, I stopped trusting my own read on people, because I was afraid of being wrong in a way I could not afford. But the evidence got too loud to ignore. And then I did the one thing your mother always swore I was good at. When I finally bothered to do it, I paid attention." His eyes were red, but he was not crying. "There is something I want to give you," I said. I went to the back office and carried out the drawer I had brought from the kitchen table at home, just for tonight. I set it on the table between us. Inside were the envelopes, 156 of them, each one addressed in my hand, each one sealed, each one dated. The oldest went back almost 3 years. The newest was from last Tuesday. "I have been writing to you every week," I said. "Since the year you started to drift away from me, I never sent them. I knew Sloane went through your mail, and I could not afford it. But they were always meant for you." Patrick reached in and lifted the top envelope. He turned it over and read the date. Then he reached deeper and took out an older one, the paper a little soft from sitting, and he held the 2 of them in his hands without opening either. "The way you hold a thing you did not know you had been waiting for." "Was there anything in them worth reading?" he said. There was the restaurant," I said. "The regulars who asked after you. Things I kept remembering about your mother. What I hoped for you. Some weeks there was nothing worth saying and I wrote anyway, just so the week would have a letter in it." I looked at the stack. There was not much in this last while that I did not put in those letters. He set them back in the drawer, one at a time, carefully. We stayed at that table another hour. The rain did not let up. We did not talk about Sloan, or the investigation, or what came next. We talked about smaller things, about a stew Diane used to make on cold nights, about the summer Patrick was 9, and we drove the family to Biloxi, and he got stung by something in the shallows and cried for 20 minutes and then demanded to go straight back into the water. His mother said that was the whole of him in a single afternoon, too stubborn to stay frightened of a thing that had already done its worst to him. He laughed when I brought that up. A real one. Not the careful, folded sound he had been making for years, but the whole thing, the kind that reaches a man's eyes. It was the first time I had heard it in longer than I could say. After a while, he looked toward the kitchen. "Can I stay here tonight?" he said. "I don't want to go back to that house. This restaurant has always been your home, son," I said. The world does not rearrange itself all at once. It does it slowly, on paper, in rooms you are not standing in. Sloan was arrested 11 days after Thanksgiving. She pleaded guilty before it ever reached a courtroom. Her own attorneys told her that what Paul and Martha had put together left her nothing to stand on. 4 years in a federal prison. Restitution she will be repaying for the rest of her working life. The $1.8 million she had moved under her maiden name was frozen before Christmas and clawed back by spring. Magnolia withdrew their offer the morning the fraud became public. A buyer who builds his bid on a stolen company is a liability no firm wants its name beside, and Derek Ashford was gone from them inside a week. The petition that was meant to have me declared unfit to manage my own life was withdrawn by the very attorney who had filed it, in a single line, with no apology in it. I felt no joy in any of it. I had expected to. For 10 months I had imagined this would feel like winning. It did not feel like winning. It felt like the quiet after a long fever, the heat finally gone, and the body too worn out to celebrate. Only to rest. There was one more thing the law could have reached for, and Martha drove out to tell me about it herself. She sat with me at the bar and said that the district attorney, now that he had the recording, could look harder at the night Diane died. At the address Sloan gave, at the 40 minutes, it could mean more years. It would also mean my wife's name spoken aloud in a courtroom again. I told her no. She did not argue. She only asked me to be certain. My wife drowned because a frightened girl gave the wrong number to a man on a telephone. I said. That part I can forgive. I have spent 19 years learning how. What I cannot forgive is the silence she kept afterward, and what she chose to do with all the years it bought her. But Diane is gone. Martha. I will not spend what is left of my own life turning her name into a hammer. I have my restaurant back. I have my son back. I will not take one thing more in her name than she would have taken herself, and she would never have taken this. Martha looked at me for a long moment. Then she put her papers away and let it lie. Carlos came 2 days before Christmas. He did not come inside. He stood at the back door in his street clothes with his keys in his hand, and when I opened it, he held them out to me without a word. 20 years he had carried those keys. Diane had sewn his name onto his apron with her own hands. I took them. I could send the police after you, I said. What you did is a crime of its own. Martha tells me it would hold. He did not lift his eyes. I am not going to. Not because you have earned the mercy. Because I am 75 years old, and I will not spend the time I have left feeding a thing like that. Diane would not want it of me. He started to say something. I shook my head. But you do not come back here. Carlos, you knew that the morning you sent the first email, go on home. He went. I have not seen him since. I do not hate him, I am too old, and I have buried too much to carry hatred that far. But some doors, once a man has walked out of them on his own 2 feet, do not open again. And we both knew which kind that one was. Patrick filed for divorce the first week of December. He made no speech about it. He simply did it. The way a man at last sets down a weight he should never have agreed to pick up. And then he went to work. He sat with Martha and the accountants and untangled, one line at a time, everything Sloan had spent 16 years knotting. He killed the sale for good. He learned, for the first time in his life, exactly what his father's restaurant was worth, and exactly what it had nearly cost. Some nights he stayed until the chairs were up on the tables, and the 2 of us worked in the same room without saying a great deal, which is its own kind of language between a father and a son. One night he asked me to show him how I break down a fish, and I did. And he was clumsy at it and did not pretend he was not. I had not watched my son let himself be plainly bad at a thing, right in front of me, in something close to 20 years. That, more than any of the lawyer's paper, was how I knew he was coming back. Then, on a cold morning in January, I came down at 3:30 the way I have come down at 3:30 nearly every morning of my life, and found the kitchen light already burning. Patrick was at the stove. He had a clean apron on and a heavy pot already set out on the range. The way a man lays out his tools when he has decided something in the dark and does not want to lose his nerve before the sun comes up. "Teach me the gumbo," he said. "The real one. The way Mom made it." For a moment I could not get a word out. I had wanted this for so many years that hearing him say it out loud felt like a thing that might break if I reached for it too fast. I crossed my own kitchen. In the dark hour his mother and I had once kept together for so many years, and I stood beside my son at the stove. "Wash your hands," I said. "We'll see whether you got your grandmother's hands, or only her stubbornness." It took 8 months. Patrick learned the gumbo the way a man learns anything worth learning badly, for a long while, until one morning he does not. He burned the roux more times than I could count. I did not do it for him. A thing like that cannot be given. It can only be stood next to, morning after morning, until the hands remember what the mouth already knows. The morning it finally came out right, I did not have to tell him. He tasted it off the spoon and went still the spoon halfway back down to the pot because he had felt it for himself. That it was hers, not an imitation of hers. Hers. The same gumbo Diane used to make in that kitchen before he was tall enough to see over the range. He looked up at me with his mother's whole face, and neither of us said anything, because nothing needed saying. That was the morning I gave him the book. I brought it out of the office, the recipe book his great-grandmother started, and his mother filled. The one Diane went back into the rising water to save. I put it in his hands. "Your mother told me to give you this when you were ready," I said. She wrote that I would know when. I never believed her. For 19 years, I was sure that day would never come. I looked at my son. I am sure he held it the way you hold something heavier than its weight. He did not open it right away. He just held it, and then said, very quietly, that he would not let her down again. I told him she had never once believed he would. We reopened in July. Patrick had the new sign made without telling me. I found it hanging over the door one morning. Brennan and Son. And under that, in smaller letters, established 1949. Rebuilt 2005. Reborn 2025. I stood on the sidewalk a long while, looking at the word son before I could go inside. They came back. Miss Loretta first, early enough to fix whatever she has decided I set out wrong. Hector and his wife. Raymond Thibodeau drove up from Houston, not to a franchise this time, but to the only Brennans there has ever been. He shook my hand at the door and said the gumbo tasted like coming home 6 hours' drive to be told he was right. People ask me how a man my age found it in him to fight the way I fought 10 months and the better part of my savings to take back one old building on Magazine Street. They think it was about the building. It was never about the building. Diane spent her life teaching me a thing I learned too late. When I had almost lost everything, she left me. Love is not something you feel and then set on a shelf like a photograph. It is something you do, with your hands, every day, whether anyone is watching or not. It is a stock you start at 3:30 in the morning. It is 156 letters that no one will ever read. It is going back into rising water for a book, because the people you love are going to need it after you are gone. I did not save Brennan's. Diane saved it. 19 years ago, when she taught me what it was for. I only finished what she had started. I will not tell you it is all mended. A family does not come back whole. Patrick came back to me, but not all of him did. The boy who laughed with his whole face. I do not get back. The man across from me now is quieter and harder, and still checks a door when it opens behind him. And some of that is mine to answer for. I told myself for too long that a father does not step between a man and his wife, and I let the years run while she hollowed out my son an arm's length from where I stood. That part I carry, and will. Last night he came to the house for supper, the way he does now, 2 and 3 times a week. And for the first time in 19 years, the chair across from mine, the one Diane found on Magazine Street the year we married, the one I had eaten across from empty more nights than I will admit to a living soul, was not empty. Patrick sat in it, not to take her place. No one takes her place. He sat in it because a table is meant to be full, and because she would rather it was him there than no one at all. And still, I would trade the restaurant, the verdict, the name back over my door, all of it, for one more ordinary supper with the woman that chair was bought for. Winning back everything she left me did not bring me 1 inch closer to her. No one warns you that justice and getting back what you lost are not the same thing. The last words my wife ever wrote to me, on a page she folded away the morning before the storm took her, were these: "Don't eat dinner alone for too long." It took me 19 years. But I heard her. In the end, I heard her. If you have sat with me all the way to here, maybe there is a chair across from yours that has stood empty too long. Maybe there is a son, or a father, or a friend you have not spoken to in years, and you keep telling yourself there is still time to fix it. There is, but there is never as much of it as you believe. Do not wait 19 years the way I did. And whatever else you do, do not eat dinner alone. Tell me about them in the comments. The ones you mean to go back for. I read everyone. And if this story meant something to you tonight, then stay a while. Pull up a chair. There will be another one waiting for you next time.